Their agitation arises because a design they constructed has fallen apart. You see, when people operate from a place of manipulation, building their actions on illusion, they are constructing a house on sand. They forget the toll this takes, not on you, but on their own foundation. Life built on deceit begins to erode from within. For a time, it might seem they are succeeding, but the structure is fundamentally unstable. Eventually, the facade gives way, revealing the emptiness and regret that lies beneath. Their true frustration is that they misjudged your spirit. They saw your stillness and believed it was surrender. They mistook your loyalty for a lack of awareness. Your compassion was seen not as strength, but as a weakness to be exploited. And so, they wove their complex webs, certain of their control. What they could not foresee was your turning away, that you would stop nourishing their narrative, that you would choose inner alignment over their chaos, clarity over their pretense, and a quiet integrity over remaining in their turbulent waters. They did not account for your evolution, because your clarity became a mirror to their own confusion. And now their strategy has not simply failed, its imbalance has returned to them. People who operate this way live in fear of self-reflection. They do not wish to look at their own truth. Their entire strategy is to have others carry the weight of their own inner discord. This is why they weave illusions. It is because they cannot bear the emptiness within. So when you rise, when you reclaim your center, they do not feel peace. They feel seen, and in that exposure, a deep disturbance arises, because the one outcome they depended on, you remaining diminished, did not come to pass. You began to heal. And that healing, that quiet restoration, becomes a testament to their own stagnation. The turmoil they now hold is not truly about you. It is about the disquiet they refuse to address. It is about the dissolving of an illusion of control they once cherished. It is about the simple truth that their methods no longer find purchase. And this is profoundly unsettling for a spirit that relies on illusion for its sense of self. You became a reflection of their choices, not because you intended harm, but because you simply chose to no longer absorb it. That is the insight that disturbs them most. The simple fact that you stepped out of the dynamic, that you chose authenticity without needing revenge, that you walked away, not with a loud declaration, but with the steady calm of someone who has found their path. And they are now left in the landscape of their own making, with the echoes of their own choices. You see, those who manipulate often mistake short-term tactics for long-term wisdom. They chase fleeting moments of influence, sacrificing enduring peace. But true inner peace does not come from dominion over others. It is born from truth. And this is why they have none. Their spirit is unsettled, restless, and disturbed. Not because you have wounded them, but because they could not disrupt your journey toward wholeness. There is a quiet power in choosing to step away from a dynamic you were never meant to sustain. This decision disrupts the entire architecture they work to create. It gently forces them to confront a profound insight, that real strength does not come from controlling others. It comes from mastering oneself. And that is what you now represent, a challenge to their illusion. Your tranquility, your choice not to return discord with discord, your commitment to your own inner mending. This sends the clearest message you could ever convey. Because stillness has a presence, and yours has created a space they cannot fill with their noise. Let their disturbance be. Let their agitation flow. That energy is simply fear wearing a different costume. It is the fear of being truly seen for what they are. The fear of becoming irrelevant now that you have gently detached. The fear of their methods no longer working. And that fear is a prison of their own design. You do not have to enter it. You have nothing to prove. Your journey is its own victory, not by playing their game with more skill, but by remembering your own. That is strength. That is peace. That is transformation. They thought the game was about power over another. You have shown them it was always about one's own character. And in this, they fell short. Not because you defeated them, but because they compromised their own spirit while trying to outmaneuver a simple truth. Now they must live with the resonance of that. You, on the other hand, are now free, not just from them, but from the part of yourself that once allowed that imbalance. And that freedom, that evolution, is something they will never grasp, for it is found in a humility they have not yet cultivated. Let their spirit be unsettled. Let them spiral in their own complexities. You have a peaceful path to walk. They perceived your compassion not as a strength, but as a lack of resolve. And this was their first and most fundamental misjudgment. They believed your capacity for empathy was a flaw, not a gift. They observed your patience and interpreted it as passivity. They saw your deep loyalty and assumed it was a form of blindness. But this is the lens through which such minds often view the world. They measure the spirit of others using their own fragmented ruler. They assume everyone is playing the same discordant game they are. A game of masks, of hidden intentions, of securing small advantages. So when they meet a genuine heart, one that offers itself without strategy, they do not know how to receive it. And instead of treasuring its rarity, they seek to leverage it. They thought you were predictable. They believed they could subtly create disharmony, keeping you close as an object they could influence at will. You offered forgiveness when it was not yet earned. You gave them further opportunities when they showed no sign of true change. And in their own framework, they took your grace as evidence that you were not their equal, as if setting boundaries was the only sign of strength and mercy was a form of foolishness. This is what happens when one tries to understand a deep river from the shallow banks of power dynamics. But what they did not see, what they could not comprehend, is that compassion is not a weakness. It is a profound strength. It is power held in gentle reserve. It is the choice to offer harmony where one could bring discord. And for a long while, you chose harmony, not from an aversion to conflict, but from a hope that they might recognize the value of something true. You held a quiet faith that if you showed them what loyalty and truth felt like, they would rise to meet you in that space. That is not weakness, that is an open heart, and it is a precious thing. So you remained longer than was wise. You offered explanations they did not deserve to hear. You poured loving energy into a space where none was reflected back. And they used this against you. They reframed your virtues as vulnerabilities. And in doing so, they told themselves a story that you were naive, that you were dependent, that you lacked the inner resolve to ever turn away. That story allowed them to feel a sense of control. It justified their actions. But then, a moment arrived they never anticipated. The moment the mist cleared from your mind, when you saw them and the situation with clarity, when the weight of it all settled, and your spirit, weary and tested, decided it was enough. You did not raise your voice. You did not retaliate. You did not lower your own energy to match theirs. You simply stopped being available. You ceased responding. You withdrew the access they had once wielded as a tool. You chose yourself. And that, above all else, unsettled their world. Because the one thing a manipulator cannot comprehend is losing the person they believed they could always bend. The one who kept giving. The one who was quiet out of love, not fear. They thought the game could continue indefinitely. But a game requires all players to remain on the board. And you simply picked up your pieces and walked your own path with a quiet dignity, without needing a grand exit. Now they are disturbed. Not because you wronged them, but because you finally did something profoundly right for yourself. When you stopped meeting their chaos with your compassion, when you stopped allowing them to define your reality, you dissolved their illusion of influence, and they are left with a truth they cannot manipulate. You were never weak. You were profoundly kind, and they mistook that for something they could dominate. Allow that to settle within you. They are not unsettled because you failed them. They are unsettled because you grew, because your strength revealed their fragility, because your evolution highlighted their own inertia, because your stillness echoes louder than all their noise. They are not just agitated with you. They are at odds with themselves, though they may never speak it. Deep down, They know they held something rare in their hands with you, and they chose to exploit it rather than honor it. This is the path of those who live by illusion. They undermine the very things that could bring them peace. And by the time they see what they have lost, it is too late. The kind spirit has walked on. The loyal heart has learned. The quiet one has found their own inner voice. Not to argue, not to persuade, but to walk away with conviction. And in that moment, they finally see your kindness was never weakness. It was a gift, one they were not ready to receive, and one they will not receive again. Now all they have is the stillness, the emptiness, the space left by a soul they thought they could hold forever. And no matter how loud their disturbance becomes, no matter how they try to reshape the story to soothe themselves, a quiet truth will always remain. They played their game, and it backfired. Because in trying to diminish someone they saw as pliable, they only revealed the deep imbalance within themselves. And you are not broken. You are not bitter. You are clearer, stronger, wiser, and most importantly at peace. Your growth revealed their illusion. That is why they are so disturbed by your presence now. You see, when you begin to rise, when you mend, evolve, and become more than the limited version they encouraged, you challenge the very ground they stand on. Their influence was only effective when you were in a state of self-doubt. Their perceived power only held sway as long as you questioned your own inner knowing. As long as you were in the fog of their narrative, they could feel in control. They could convince themselves that you needed them, that their perspective was the only truth. But as you started to awaken, that entire structure began to wobble. They inhabited a world where you were meant to stay small, where your light was obscured by fear and a sense of obligation they fostered. A world they helped maintain, where your inner certainty was slowly eroded, not always with overt actions, but with subtle dismissals, with the withholding of warmth, by subtly changing the past. These were not just thoughtless behaviors, they were movements rooted in a deep need to maintain a perceived advantage. Because if you were to ever see yourself with clarity, if you were to recognize your own strength and your own light, it would expose how hollow their own sense of power truly was. And then it happened. You began to shift, perhaps subtly at first. You started to ask different questions. You began to hold space for yourself. You stopped reacting from old patterns. You no longer felt the need to explain yourself, nor to repair what they consistently unsettled. You became still, observant, grounded, and that stillness terrified them. The more centered you became, the more their own imbalance was revealed. They felt the illusion breaking, and that is where the inner turmoil began. Your growth does more than just mend you. It brings light to the entire environment. When you evolve, you carry truth with you, and truth is powerful. It has no need to be loud. It simply is. Your calm presence began to highlight their inner chaos. Your quiet boundaries revealed their lack of respect. Your new standards of being showed the nature of their manipulations. You did not need a direct confrontation. Your very existence as a person who refused to remain in illusion became the confrontation. And that is what deeply disturbs a spirit like that, being seen with clarity. For the first time, they were not the author of the story. They could no longer bend your words or deflect responsibility or distract you with guilt. You had changed. You had grown. And growth makes it impossible to return to illusion. It is like awakening from a dream. Once conscious, you cannot pretend to be asleep again. They saw this awakening in you, and it was deeply unsettling. What was even more challenging for them is that your growth was not just private. Your energy shifted. Your very presence began to resonate differently. The narrative they had painted of you, as fragile, as unstable, was dissolving. In its place stood someone centered, composed, and clear. Their story no longer matched the reality people could see. This contrast was difficult for them, as it forced a reckoning with their own narrative. They became defensive. Perhaps they said you had changed, you were now cold or distant. But you were not being distant. You were simply done being used as a source of energy. And that distinction pierced their illusion like a ray of light. You no longer gave them access to your emotional currents as you once had. No more emotional tides for them to navigate. No more vulnerable spaces for them to enter. Your silence became more resonant than any words you had ever spoken. And it left them exposed, standing in a world where they thrived on confusion. Because here is the deeper truth. They never held power over you. They held the illusion of power, which was sustained by your own uncertainty. Once you became certain of your own spirit, that illusion vanished. And without it, they were left with the reality of themselves. And that reality was challenging and uncomfortable. Not because you wanted to cause pain, but because your light simply showed the nature of their actions. And some cannot bear to be seen in the light. It is easier for them to resent your transformation than to face their own choices. But you did not grow for them. You grew for peace. You grew because you were wary of staying small to accommodate another's fragile sense of self. You grew because your life was meant for more than mere survival. And in doing so, you broke the cycle. You became the one who stepped out of the illusion. And in that act of self-respect, you became a profound challenge to them. Not because you were unkind, but because you refused to be controlled. They do not resent you for lying. They resent you because you stopped believing their lies. That is the one thing they cannot forgive. That is what truly echoes in their mind. Not that you exposed them to the world, but that you saw them for what they were. You made them face themselves. And now, every time they see your peace, your growth, your centeredness, it reminds them of what they chose to abandon. It reminds them that they lost something true, and they did it by their own hand. That is the beauty of your transformation. It did not just save you, it revealed them. Your stillness is more resonant than their disturbance, and that is what is driving their inner conflict. You see, when a person is accustomed to controlling a narrative, they rely on your response. They are nourished by your explanations, your sorrow, your frustration. As long as you are reacting, you are still engaged in their dynamic. You are still part of the dance. But when you become still, not from defeat, but from clarity, they lose their footing. Not just influence over you, but the illusion that they were more important than your own inner peace. And that silence becomes a mirror from which they cannot turn away. They wished for you to become loud. They hoped you would break down, protest, or become agitated, because then they could point and say, "You see, they are unbalanced. They are emotional. They are the source of the problem." This is how such patterns work. They create chaos and then fault you for being disturbed by it. They push and pull until your vision is blurred and then blame you for stumbling. But when you refuse to continue that dance, when you ceased offering them your emotional energy, you took away the very foundation of their strategy, your engagement. This is what they never anticipated. That your strength would manifest as quiet detachment, that your most powerful action would be to gently turn away, leaving no entry point for further disruption. They do not know how to process that kind of tranquility. They perceive stillness as a form of punishment because they themselves live in constant noise. They are accustomed to drama, to conflict, to ceaseless motion. Your silence is not just an absence of words. It is the end of their relevance in your journey, and that is unbearable to a spirit who has built their identity on being at the center of a dynamic. They are unsettled now because they are powerless. They cannot reach your core as they once did. Your detachment conveys more than 1,000 debates ever could. It tells them, without saying a word, "You do not warrant another explanation. You will not be given another piece of my energy." And that, more than any argument, dismantles their perceived position. It removes their illusion of superiority. It forces them to sit with the fact that they are no longer the focal point of your world, that you have reclaimed your time, your focus, your dignity. And they cannot distort that into something negative, because there is nothing left for them to twist. Stillness is confusing to those who are used to creating harm without consequence. They expect you to push back, because struggle implies that you still care on some level. But when you withdraw, when you no longer explain or defend yourself, it signifies a deeper truth. They no longer have a significant hold. Not on your peace, not on your path, not on your future. And that realization, more than any spoken accusation, is what unsettles them. It is not that you had nothing to say. You had oceans of sorrow, chapters of betrayal, volumes of truths they were unwilling to hear. But you have learned that not every spirit is worthy of your voice. Some hear your words only to distort them. Some listen only to form a reply, not to understand. So you chose silence, not from fear, but from wisdom. Because when you have seen enough, felt enough, and given enough of yourself away, trying to explain the self-evident, you realize that sometimes the most potent action is to say nothing at all and continue on your path. And the profound irony is that your silence is now the loudest thing in their world. It echoes in the spaces where your presence used to be. It follows them into the quiet moments when their own deceptions no longer provide distraction. When the attention they once commanded falls away too, they thought they would feel victorious by pushing you away, but now they are simply left with themselves. And your absence reveals everything they tried to obscure. They tell themselves you are cold, that you have changed, that you never truly cared, but deep down, a wiser part of them knows the truth. They were given chances. You did not simply vanish. You offered opportunity after opportunity, tried to mend what they kept unsettling, and remained long after your own spirit began to feel dim. Your silence was not abrupt. It was earned. It was the final, quiet act of a soul who had finally remembered its own worth. And that knowing that you are no longer willing to make yourself small for someone who refused to grow is what stays with them. Let them be agitated. Let them cast their accusations into the wind, hoping for a reaction. That is not your burden to carry anymore. You do not need to defend your peace. You do not need to explain your stillness. Those who understand, understand. And those who do not were never truly listening in the first place. What is important is that you are free, that you no longer need to be heard to know your own truth, that you have outgrown the need to prove anything to anyone who saw your heart only as an object for their influence. In a world often filled with noise, your silence is your sanctuary. And for those who once thrived on your turmoil, it is the space where they must finally face themselves. Their anger is a shield for their shame, and this is what consumes them from within. On the surface, they may appear indignant, resentful, or even self-assured. They might cast blame on you, mock your journey, or pretend to be entirely unaffected. But underneath all of that noise is an uncomfortable truth they are desperate to avoid. They are aware of what they did, and a deep part of them knows it was out of alignment with truth. The anger is just a story they tell themselves. It's the armor they wear to avoid facing the raw, humbling feeling of regret for having damaged something pure. Shame is a potent force. It does not shout like anger. It whispers in the quiet moments. It follows a person into stillness. It returns when the outer distractions fade. This is the energy they are now navigating. But they may never acknowledge it, because to acknowledge shame is to acknowledge a misstep. It requires dropping the protective armor. And for those who live by illusion, who deceive themselves as much as they deceive others, facing their own fallibility is terrifying. So instead, they project outward. They find external reasons for their inner turmoil, because to look inward would feel unbearable. You became a mirror. That is the core of the issue. Not because you admonished them or broadcasted their actions, but because you simply walked away with your spirit whole. You did not descend to their level. You did not engage in a game of retribution. And that, more than anything, unsettled them. Because for a person filled with inner regret, seeing someone they have wronged rise with dignity is a powerful and uncomfortable sight. It compels them to feel all the things they have tried to suppress. Your silence holds them in a space of accountability more than any debate could. Each time their thoughts turn to you, they are reminded of their choices and of what was lost. And that is the most difficult part for them. Not the loss of control, Not the loss of access, but the loss of your respect. Because even if they pretend it does not matter, it matters deeply. You were not just a person they wronged. You were someone who saw their potential, someone who offered them grace, who accepted them despite their fragmented state. And to know they betrayed that trust, to know they dismantled a bridge they lacked the wisdom to cross back over. That sense of shame cuts deeply, but they lack the tools to process it, so they bury it beneath layers of indignation, denial, and projection. They will paint themselves as the one who was wronged because it is an easier narrative to hold than admitting they caused the harm. They will say you left them, that you were too sensitive, that you changed. All of these stories serve to avoid the sickening feeling of regret that dwells just below the surface. But in their inner world, where the truth resides, away from the noise and defenses, they know. They know you were true to them. They know your heart was pure in its intent. And they know there is no returning. There is a reason they continue to speak of you, think of you, and try to alter the narrative. It is not a sign of having moved on. It is the sign of being stuck. Because what was lost was not insignificant. It was not something they can simply forget or cover with new experiences. You were authentic. And now that you are no longer in their life, they are forced to sit with the reality of who they are without your light to reflect back at them. That is where the shame resides, in that profound emptiness. They did not expect to feel this. When they made their moves, when they played their games, they felt they were winning. They mistook manipulation for strength. But a sense of strength built on illusion eventually reveals itself as fragility. Because when you betray someone who was genuine, you do not walk away clean. You carry the resonance of that choice. You carry the unease even if you deny it. And over time, that unease can corrode the spirit. You may never hear them say it. They may never offer an apology or take responsibility. But do not mistake their outer posture for inner peace. There is a conflict within them now, one they created, and one they must navigate alone. And every time they see you living your truth, growing, healing, becoming more than they ever thought you could be, it stirs the shame in you. Because you were supposed to stay broken. You were supposed to remain small. They thought that by dimming your light, their own would appear brighter. But all they accomplished was to blind themselves. Let them project. Let them wear their anger like armor. You do not need to respond or defend yourself. The truth holds its own integrity. And in time, their mask will thin, because rage is an energy that consumes itself. Anger burns out, but shame endures. And when all the turbulence settles, they will still be left with the truth they cannot outrun. They allowed something beautiful to pass through their hands. Not by accident, but by choice. And the echoes of that choice will follow them far longer than they ever imagined. You, on the other hand, are free. You felt the pain, faced the shadow, and chose to rise. You let go, not because it didn't matter, but because you knew that you mattered more. That is the fundamental difference. You have owned your story. They are still running from theirs. And until they stop hiding behind the mask of anger, they will not find peace, because deep down, they do not resent you. They resent themselves for having lost you. Their anger is not power. It is not dominance. It is a facade, a covering for something far more fragile, a shame that has been growing within them. And what is unsettling for them now is that the facade is beginning to falter. No matter how loudly they proclaim their righteousness, how much they project blame, or how many others they try to sway, there is a quiet, persistent knowing inside them they can no longer silence. The awareness that they brought this upon themselves. You did not cause their undoing. You did not expose them or seek revenge. But your growth, your silence, your refusal to return to the old dynamic, that did something much more profound in their view. It revealed they were never as influential as they believed. It proved that your worth was never dependent on their validation. And now they are spiraling, not because you wronged them, but because you did not. You did not lower your spirit to meet theirs. You did not become bitter. You chose to rise. And that kind of rising forces a person like that to see the stark gap between who they pretended to be and who you have truly become. The more they see you thriving quietly, healing with grace, and moving forward in your own light, the more unbearable their own reflection becomes. They cannot stand who they are without your presence to manipulate, without your heart to use as an anchor, without your kindness to absorb. And that, more than anything, is where their shame is rooted. Not just in the act of having wronged you, but in the loss of the one person who still saw good in them, even when they could not see it themselves. That is the part they will never speak aloud. You were their safe harbor. You were the one who accepted them through their turbulence. You were the mirror that showed them their own potential for hope and for peace. And instead of choosing to grow into that reflection with you, they chose to exploit that love. Because growth requires courage, vulnerability, and accountability. And they did not possess these qualities, so they chose to attack the very person who could have guided them toward transformation. And now, long after you have moved on, they remain shackled to the inner prison they built for themselves. Anger is their conditioned response because shame feels like weakness to them. They were taught to dominate, not to reflect, to blame, not to introspect, to survive through manipulation rather than true connection. So they create disturbance. But their disturbance is hollow. It lacks a foundation in truth. It is a defense mechanism, a loud noise to drown out the whisper that continues to follow them. You lost something real. And you did it with your own hands. This is why they cannot let you go from their thoughts. It is why they may still observe your life from a distance. They are trying to outrun their shame by rewriting reality. But no matter what they tell themselves, the facts do not change. You were genuine, you were present, you were loyal, and they were careless with your spirit. They played a short-sighted game and lost someone they now realize they never truly earned. And instead of humbling themselves, they lash out. But each time they do, the grip of their own shame tightens. Because deep down, they know you never fought them. You simply outgrew them. And here is the truth they cannot bear. You did not need to ruin them. They are doing it to themselves. The longer they refuse to accept their own actions, the longer they must carry that invisible weight. And over time, that weight only grows heavier. It isolates them. It hardens their spirit. It taints every new interaction because they have not healed, they have not learned, and they have not changed. They are still living in the same pattern, projecting blame and fighting ghosts, while you have stepped into a version of yourself they can never access again. Let that be enough for you. You do not need to state your case, seek a final word, or wait for an apology. Sometimes your own peace is the only closure you will ever receive. And it is more than enough, because while they are trapped in a loop of denial, you are free. You are no longer looking for their approval. And that freedom is a form of quiet, enduring justice that echoes every time they remember how things could have been, if only they had made a different choice. So let them wear their anger like armor. You know what lies beneath it. You have seen the truth. You have lived it. And now you have risen from it. That is something they will have to live with long after all the noise has faded. Because while disturbance may be loud, shame has a very long memory.